Welcome to the 60 Plus Best Life podcast. We know that being in your 60s doesn't mean being over the hill anymore, and that, in fact, for many of us, the 60s feel more like a time of bright new beginnings, but with the added benefit of decades of wisdom and perspective. We also know that being in this time of life poses many questions and anxieties. We're happy to bring you conversations with those who have taken actions to create or enhance their lives to experience as much vitality, accomplishment, and purpose as possible by embracing change and the challenges in front of them. You'll also learn from health and wellness professionals, creators, and visionaries who are making life at 60 plus the best time of life. Join me, Daisy Swan, and Kimberly Fowler as we explore this life stage rich with possibility, depth, and new beginnings. By liking, subscribing, and forwarding this podcast, you'll be increasing the awareness that indeed the 60s and beyond hold so much more opportunity for enhanced health, personal growth, income, adventure, and satisfaction as well. Let's change those outdated perceptions that being in your 60s spells old age for good. Welcome, everyone, to 60 Plus Best Life. We're so excited to have a phenomenal guest with us today, Anne Grant. Anne Grant is an attorney, author, entrepreneur, law professor, mother, and hard to believe, also grandmother. She started her family law practice to help women navigate the legal minefields and outsmart the system so that they can get to a new and better life with their sanity intact and money in the bank. And I know she does that. Anne's best-selling book, The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot, What Every Woman Needs to Know About Finances, Child Custody, Lawyers, and Planning Ahead, provides legal, financial, and psychological expertise to help readers skillfully prepare and protect themselves as they navigate the modern divorce proactively, efficiently, and resiliently. So she has family law offices in Manhattan Beach, Brentwood, and I didn't realize it, also Newport Beach. So congratulations on that, Anne.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we thought it would be helpful and interesting to have Anne come on to the 60 Plus Best Life podcast to give us some ideas about divorce, the gray wave, things that women and men should be knowing about. So tell us a little bit, Anne, about what your take is on living your best life in the 60s. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your life transformations that have brought you to where you are.
I'd be happy to. I'm really excited to be here today. I actually turned 60 just last summer, and I got to enjoy it in Taormina in Italy with my son, who's 21. Great. And his best friend is also 21, and his best friend's family. We're like family. And so this is a topic that's very near and dear to my mind. One of the commitments I made to myself when I turned 60 overseas was to age in reverse and to take actionable steps to do that. Part of this was inspired by watching my mom age. She's in her 80s now and is suffering from a number of physical ailments. And so I've been deeply motivated to figure out sort of an experiment with a plethora of things, which I'm happy to talk about and share so that I can, as I said, each year celebrate that I'm 1 year younger. So when
the Benjamin Button reverse. Right. That's great.
So I took this to heart, and I just recently, about a week and a half ago, got back from a yoga retreat in Costa Rica that I went on with my 26-year-old daughter. And this wasn't just in Costa Rica. We flew into the main airport in Costa Rica, and then we took a tiny airplane down further south to the Osa Peninsula, which is really off the grid and like right where the jungle meets the ocean. And I learned to surf. And so that is one actionable thing that I just did in the last month, to practice learning or aging in reverse. It made me feel much younger than my biological age. And I loved it. I loved it so much that my daughter and I have committed to go back again next year. It'll be my third year in the jungle, and do yoga twice a day together, eat really healthy food, try new things. I plan to surf each day. I mean, the waves are about this big, so everybody feels like they're gets up and feels like a great surfer. But it really did. I will tell you that when I came back, I was so energized from this trip that I've done several things because I felt so great. I've added weight training back into my daily or my weekly workout routine. I've been getting up every morning and either doing yoga in my home gym or more and more with the pandemic going not being as prominent, I've been back in class with other people, which I think is very inspirational. And I've added Pilates into my daily workout routine. And I know when I start my day with one of these practices, I can show up for the people that work for me and my clients and be much more present because I feel good in my body. So those are a few of the things that I've just done recently, and I think that are particularly relevant to this concept of living our best life in our 60s. And then with regard to addressing your question about my life transformation, I didn't never imagine that I would be able to travel the way I have and do the things I'm doing at this stage of my life. I was raised in a very religious, conservative family. I got married when I was very young. I'm now single and happily single, but I really expected I'd be married and kind of settle down. My kids are launched, but I didn't expect to be learning to surf in the jungles of Costa Rica or be single at this point. And one of the things that I have learned is, and I think anybody else that I've talked to that is successful in aging in reverse, is to take the curveballs that we all experience in our lifetime and use them as opportunities. And the more that we do that, it really determines whether our life will be big or small. And so that's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. In the work that I do, where I represent a lot of women going through divorce and have to start their lives over, I encourage them to push themselves out of their comfort zone. And I think the more that we can do that, whether it's through challenging ourselves with travel or physical activity or taking on new interests at this point in our life, then the happier that we will be and the more successful we will feel in our lives over 60.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Daisy and I are, I think we're trying to age in reverse also. We actually met in yoga, in yoga class. So I love what you're doing. With our audience, I know a lot of people are talking about, like the gray wave or divorces, people in their 60s getting divorced. And I was excited to talk to you about this just because, I talk to friends about it all the time, and it'd be nice to have somebody that could actually give us some good advice.
Yeah. I mean, this gray wave thing, I was just recently, I thought I'd try pickleball for the first time. I've been a tennis player for a long time, but I went to a pickleball class and met some wonderful people, mostly women. And one of them told me how she had been married for 38 years and her husband called from the airport and just said, "I'm ready to be a vagabond." And that was the end of their marriage. So, so if you can share a little bit about how people are faring and what do people need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address this. So I always think it's helpful to look at the statistics in order to inform ourselves. So I'm going to take a minute to update you on this topic, which is something that I deal with a lot in my practice. So the divorce rate in the United States for people 50 or older has doubled since 1990. And as the American population steadily ages, gray divorces will keep rising. In fact, by 2030, it's estimated that 800,000 will occur annually. So certainly I've noticed in my practice that exactly what you just described, Daisy, where people are realizing that they have their whole lives ahead of them right around that time when their children are aging out and maybe they're hitting retirement age. And so, maybe they're practicing aging in reverse and they look at their spouse that they've been married to for that period of time and they're ready to move on. And so I deal with this multiple times, the story you just described, like several times a day. So, sorry. Let me just further answer your question.
Yeah.
Answer to how these people are faring. The women are doing just fine. So there was a study, but going back to the research, that was published very recently, debunking decades of studies that married people, and particularly married women, are happier and healthier than their single counterparts. And to the contrary, what the study has revealed is that marriage does not mean better health, higher self-esteem, or long-term happiness, particularly for women. In fact, every single study favored single women. For example, women who divorced eat healthier, they exercise more, and they have smaller waists than women who stay married. And single women are having more sex than their married counterparts.
Wow.
45% of all Americans aged 18 or older are single or divorced. So in unprecedented numbers, women are living their single lives, which are often healthier and more fulfilling than those of their coupled counterparts. So the weight of the scientific evidence is finally on their side.
Wow.
That's major. Yeah, because I read this all the time about how being married is, so much healthier for you.
Yeah, well, the facts establish exactly to the contrary. The same is not true for men. In fact, let me look at my statistics here. So only 15% of women say they want to get remarried compared to 29% of men. So women are much likely to say no thank you when it comes to remarriage than men. Men are more likely than women to remarry. There are only 30% of men who do not want to get remarried compared to 54% of women. So those are the statistics, and the numbers don't lie.
Wow.
That's very
interesting. But we also know, right, that if you're a woman, if you divorce and you have alimony, if you've been in a long marriage, if you remarry, you're going to most likely lose that alimony, right?
Yes, typically when you remarry, alimony stops. And there's, the old days when women who got divorced were sort of on life support for the rest of their lives in terms of spousal support or alimony are over. So what will happen is under the family code, and certainly the case law supports this, the supported spouse, husband or wife, is expected to become self-supporting within a reasonable period of time. Yeah, but typically now these days, at least here in LA Superior Court and the courts that we appear in, if unless a woman is, past retirement age or has a physical handicap or some other ailment that would prevent her from working, she will receive what's called a Gavron warning. And that warning essentially is such that she is to become, or he is to become self-supporting within a reasonable period of time. Mm-hmm. And so that reasonable period is subject to interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I have several matters right now where the spouses are going in to either seek termination of spousal support mm-hmm. or a significant downward modification based on the argument that sufficient time has elapsed for them to become self-supporting. Mm-hmm. And judges do entertain those arguments. So, mm-hmm. It behooves us for many reasons to become self-supporting. It's not only helpful from a monetary perspective, but it's incredibly self-affirming to know that we can take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah. I hadn't even heard of that. A lot of my male friends that have been married just complain about, having to support their ex-wives forever.
Yes. Well, that does happen. I mean, we will have another guest who did decide to give up her alimony to get married. To somebody who she had met after a very contentious divorce. So that'll be down the line a little bit, but then she and her new husband really spelled out their agreement, so she felt comfortable being able to do that. Yeah, I mean, and I work with Anne sometimes as a vocational evaluator of sorts, where I'm working with two parties, where a spouse will be needing to get back to work after a period of time. And it is really exciting to see, for me to be able to work with them, to help them see how much they can embrace their life. And there's a lot of trepidation, of course, especially if they're young kids at home. So I know you work with people of all ages, right, Anne?
I do. And if they're young children at home and they're not the wage earner or earn less than their spouse, then their wage earning spouse will have to pay child support. So till the children age out. But, what I've found and what I advise my clients is, look, and often refer them to you, Daisy, to help them in this regard, but there's nothing more life affirming than leading a purpose-driven life. So whether that means working for financial compensation or devoting your time to a nonprofit, I mean, the people that are the happiest, even people that have plenty of money, are not the people who retire and just give up their work. They're the people who continue to have passion projects where they're being of service and helping others. And so, I started my practice. It was not, I didn't grow up wanting to be a family law attorney or a divorce lawyer. That was not my chosen path. Too far, in fact, to the contrary, after my very high conflict divorce, my pastor looked at me and he said, I see your future. You're going to be a spiritual divorce lawyer. And I said, oh, no, we were good friends at this point. I said, oh, hell no. I just went through a 5-year divorce. Like, no, I'm going to go back and work as a corporate litigator at a big firm and do what I, am trained to do. And he said, nope, I see your future differently. And he was right. He saw it before I did. And so the way I came to do what I'm doing is I had settled a big antitrust lawsuit. It was one of the first matters I handled when I started my own practice, and I had a break. And it's sort of, when I say a break, I had 3 young children, but I just wasn't in court all the time. And I had just come out of my very high conflict divorce, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to start a support group to share some of the things I learned through my experience of getting my life back on track after a very high conflict divorce. So I started a support group with a friend of mine who's a therapist to be of help. Mm. And what happened was one of the women in this group asked me if I could meet with her at my office and give her some legal advice. So I was happy to do it just because in the context of my own disillusion with children from another litigator, we had dealt with pretty much every issue you could encounter in a divorce. But she wanted to hire me to represent her. And I kind of, with a little bit, not trepidation, but I decided to do it, even though I wasn't a trained family law attorney. But what I found was that with the skill set I had honed as a litigator at a multinational law firm downtown LA, but then really this experience I had, I could meld those together and be tremendously effective. And I just, it was like a light bulb went off where I realized, oh, I can really help people. And it was kind of a simultaneous thing. I can have my own business, which I really needed to do so I could show up for my son's Little League games and my daughter's dance team and have that flexibility. That was my initial thinking. Yeah. One thing led to another, and my practice grew and grew and grew very organically. And often when you talk to people that are practicing their passion, again, it's what I referred to in the beginning, where we take challenges and look at them as opportunities and are very intentional about moving forward. And, my divorce could have been the worst thing that had ever happened to me. It happened during the financial crisis. We lost everything. I thought I was going to be married to this man for the rest of my life. He was the love of my life. And through a series of events, it became very clear to me that, our marriage needed to end. And it was not an easy thing. I was the one that ended it, but it was not an easy thing to do. And had to start all over at about my mid-40s. From scratch. And we had a really nice lifestyle in Manhattan Beach, and it just all completely, I had to start all over again. So it was a big, big challenge. Yeah. And I just dove in and did it. And my life has been so great. I could have never imagined, as I said, that I'd be learning how to surf in Costa Rica or celebrating my 60th birthday in Taormina with my son. And yet here I am.
Yeah.
Great. That's a very, very inspiring story for sure.
Absolutely. Huh.
Absolutely. And so for women and men in their 60s, what advice can you give them if they are considering, remarrying or getting married for the first time?
So, marriage comes with a host of legal benefits, especially in the area of estate planning. Married couples have a much easier time transferring assets to each other at death, for example. But you do need to do some proper planning in order to protect your assets. So I would recommend that if you have assets, you consider a prenuptial agreement. This will help keep some of your assets separate, and it spells out how it will be divided in case of a divorce. Of course, nobody wants to have to plan for divorce, but in terms of going back to the statistics, half the first marriages in the United States end in divorce, and 65% of second marriages will end in divorce, and about 3/4 of third marriages will end in divorce. So it makes sense to protect yourself if you have significant assets and are getting married later in life. You may feel like a prenup is a romance buster, but it can really be a lifesaver if you and your soon-to-be spouse have unequal amounts of wealth or children from a previous marriage that are expecting an inheritance. And then with regard to just some other issues to consider. So if you're getting married later in life, it's pretty likely that you've each developed your own spending and savings habits. And even if you don't get married to your partner, being together in a long-term relationship means at least some financial transparency and sharing, or you're probably not going to be together for long. So I would recommend that you talk early about how much of your finances you want to combine. So some couples will choose to combine some aspects of their finances and keep others separate. And some of the things to consider would be how will you share income, savings, and bills? How much of your financial decisions will be made jointly? And if there is a disparity in your resources, how much will each partner contribute to household maintenance? And you might consider a joint banking account for joint expenses, even if you choose to keep most other finances separate for your own use. One of the things that I can share is that, you might think that most marriages end because of infidelity. But actually, most women will overlook infidelity in a marriage, certainly like a first-time dalliance. But the thing that causes women to end up, or men, well, mostly women that will cause them to end up in my office is what I call financial infidelity. So that's where money is being handled in ways that is unexpected or to them unacceptable. And so that is why I recommend, whether you're getting married or just going to have a long-term partner, that if you're going to be living together, that you talk about these things in advance, so that's a way to avoid problems down the road.
Well, what would that look like? What is financial?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
It was the same thing. It was like, and how do you talk about that in the beginning? If that's when you're supposed to talk about it, I don't know. It's, do you have advice on that? Like, how do you bring that up?
I don't know. I'm not in a situation where I've had to do that. I know that a lot of millennials do this now. Yeah. Even when they're married, they don't just automatically share everything. Like I was talking to a millennial fellow who's married, and he was telling me that they've always done this, so that, his wife likes shoes. He likes motorcycles. She spends whatever she wants that she earns on shoes. He can spend whatever he wants of what he earns on motorcycles or whatnot. And then they have a joint account from which they pay household expenses, and they have children's expenses. And when he told me this a while ago, I told him that's very evolved. I think you have a much better shot at, because he was asking me, what do you recommend we do to stay married? And I explained what I just explained to you. And he goes, well, this is what we're doing. And I said, that's great. If more couples did that, they probably wouldn't end up in my office. When is a good time to do that? I don't know. When you guys, if you have another expert on who can answer that question, I'd love to know.
Yeah. We do have somebody who's going to come on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like I have a lot of people ask me, well, how should I tell my husband I want a divorce and when? And we spend a lot of time on that. Sometimes they'll do that in the context of meeting with a neutral third party, a therapist. I mean, I think I would just want to sit down and do it, probably after dinner and maybe one glass of wine or something at some point. Like, hey, we need to talk about this. And, if he's a guy you want to spend the rest of your life with, who's a reasonable human being, he should want to do it too.
Yeah, you would hope that there would be that kind of transparency and willingness, right, to communicate.
Yeah, especially since it's the number one thing that causes certainly marriages to fall apart. That and substance abuse, especially post-pandemic. We have a lot of people coming in where their spouses relapsed during the pandemic because isolation is the worst thing for addicts. And so every day I have people walking through my door where sadly they're just not willing to put up with that anymore. So that's the other thing that I am seeing a lot of now in my practice.
Interesting. And it's mostly women that you work with, or do you work with men as well?
I work with women and men, but I think largely as a function of the work that I've done, where the support groups I run, the book I wrote, a number of the things I'm doing, like this podcast, tend to be geared towards women, just because of the way I'm presented.
Sure.
I draw a lot of women, and I can certainly relate to a lot of what they're experiencing because I've been through this myself.
Right.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, in terms of seeing people go through this, do you see a lot of surprises in your clients, or have they known it was coming? And
I see a lot of, well, the one thing I see a lot of that astounds me is women coming in who are shocked that their husbands have a girlfriend when they haven't had sex in 2 years.
Oh.
I mean, it just blows my mind. I try to keep a straight face. It's like, look,
Oh.
yeah. So I actually am seeing that less and less, but I do still, have women coming in that are very shocked that their husbands have girlfriends when they've been living completely separate lives.
Yeah.
And remarkable and somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? The first stage of grieving is denial. I think these women are in denial.
Yeah. Well, a lot of divorce happens where people seem to have decided this is good enough. We've gone through so much. We might as well just hang in and live separate lives, right? Until something happens. Somebody meets somebody, or somebody really finds something that's so life-changing for them that they just don't need the relationship anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of women engage in what I call willful blindness in order to maintain their lifestyle, certainly in the area in which I live.
Yeah.
So, they very much enjoy playing pickleball or tennis at the club and living in their nice house by the beach and taking all their trips and not having to work. And they don't want to rock the boat, so they're in denial. I see this a lot. And then something will happen. Often the husband will just decide, like the situation you recounted where he called from the airport and said, I'm done. I had another situation where a husband tapped his wife on the shoulder on a Saturday as she was checking her email. And he said, I'm leaving. And she thought he was headed out to get bagels. And he said, no, you need to get a lawyer.
Oh no.
Seemingly claimed to be surprised. But, I think this sense of lulling yourself into sort of this denial state and not dealing with reality is imprudent.
Yes.
And unwise. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to be honest with yourself, honest with your spouse, and then take actionable steps in order to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, we've certainly been hearing, when you agree, Kimberly, that when people do go through these life changes, just as you've talked about yourself, Anne, when people do go through these changes, and certainly we have as well, that you can get through those curveballs. You can get to the other side of these major transitions and live your best life in your 60s, right?
Oh, yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine. We're having drinks the other night, and I think she's 57. She looks amazing. Talk about aging in reverse. She's a former client of mine. And we were talking about the joy of having launched our children, still being young enough and healthy enough that we can really enjoy ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
She also is single. She's dating a lot. And how we felt like we kind of cracked the code. And I think it goes back to the statistics I was talking about earlier about the studies show that single women are healthier, happier, and all those things than their counterparts. So I think it does push us out of our comfort zone. And, it's really up to you what you're going to do with it. I do see some women that are I have seen women that are sort of broken by divorce, or they remain in denial and don't get divorced. I have a good friend right now that's doing this. And it's like a cancer eating away at her. And it's just her journey. What are you going to do? She's got to decide. But it's not a fun thing to watch. And there's a lot to be said for living an authentic life, getting out of your comfort zone. I don't know if you know who Phil Stutz is, but he's written a book called The Tools. And he's also got there's a podcast out that Jonah Hill has done called Stutz. And Phil Stutz is a psychiatrist that works with a lot of celebrities. And in this book, he provides tools to help people move forward, which is really extremely helpful for someone, especially a woman who's been in a long-term marriage and has to step out of her comfort zone if her spouse wants to divorce her or she decides she needs to get divorced. And the first tool is to get out of your comfort zone is called the reversal of desire. And so what this means is whenever you want to stay comfortable, which means you're going to stay stuck, you've got to put, and he does these little diagrams. I threw it up on the whiteboard the other day for the people that work for me because I was challenging them to come out of their comfort zone. So in any event, you push through the pain, and at the other side of it is freedom. And that's certainly been my experience. And I think, you have to do it almost on a grand scale when you go through something as disruptive as a divorce, which is a major life transition in most instances. But even on a lesser scale, like I wasn't going to go surfing in Costa Rica. Last year when I went, one of the gals on the trip injured herself pretty severely. And I was talking myself out of it. Like, I can't get injured. I need to be in court when I get back. And I just decided to go for it. And I just, as I've said, I felt so good that I did it. And now I want to go back and do more.
Right.
That's how this tool works. It forces you to use different muscles than you would typically use to get out of your established patterns that make you comfortable. Get up off the couch, go lift weights in the gym, whatever it is. Get out of, you're doing this, Daisy, by starting a podcast, and look at you now, like how awesome. Like I did that when I wrote my book. I wasn't an author, but I had something that I knew I needed to say, as you do that, you're an expert. I had this amazing experience where I went to a networking event and my friend, right as my book was being published, introduced me as an author. And everyone in the room wanted to take me out for a drink or coffee because everybody has a story in them and they wanted to know how they could get a book deal. Whereas when I used to be introduced as a divorce lawyer, people would run. So, again, back to my theme of your life is as big or as small as you choose to make it. A lot of it has to do with this first tool in this book which he calls reversal of desire. And really is just about getting out of your comfort zone. And if you want to age in reverse, that's what you have to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we were actually going to do a podcast on that exact topic of like writing a book. And I've lectured on everyone's got a book inside them. So I definitely, I agree with that for sure.
Everyone has a book inside them, but getting the book from inside you onto a bookshelf is a journey unlike any other except giving birth.
Yeah.
For a much longer period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And only people that have gone through this process can really understand the joy and the pain associated with publishing a book.
Yeah. Kimberly has a great story about getting her books done.
I have a couple of books, but yeah, I don't know that it's like when you're talking, I don't have children, so I can't equate it to giving birth, but it's definitely a challenge. Definitely a challenge. Yeah.
And Kimberly hit the Rodale bullseye I mean, with your book. So that was a pretty major win.
Yeah. Well, I wanted a certain publisher, so I went after it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what you have to do with anything. You have to set your intention. You have to be really clear about it. And you have to really go after it like a heat-seeking missile. And if you do that, you will manifest your intentions. And it may not come out exactly the way you envisioned it, but you will experience growth. You will evolve. It will happen. And so intention setting, whether it's in the form of setting New Year's resolutions or doing it each morning as part of a meditation practice, is extremely important in achieving your goals, and certainly is an important part of, I think, this overall concept of having your best life at 60, 60 plus. And I love this idea because it feels very trailblazing. I mean, when I think about being a young person and 60, like, and I would have my parents as role models, like, again, my mom wasn't learning to surf. She wasn't going to the jungle. She wasn't writing books. She wasn't playing pickleball. Like, God bless us, you know, good for us.
Yeah. We're doing things a little bit differently, huh?
And here we are. Like, I mean, I really do think we have so much to look forward to. I mean, people used to look at retirement as like, that was sort of like the end. And again, I think that is what is leading to this boom of, kind of, to tie it all together, this boom of divorces is so many people are like, oh, finally got my kids launched. Hopefully have some, establish myself in whatever my life's work is. So, I either have people working for me or I'm in a more comfortable position and like I can enjoy my life some now. Like there are things I can do that I've always wanted to do, and I can take the time and space to make that happen. And, one of the benefits of the pandemic is we become virtual. Look at us having this amazing conversation, and we're all in our comfortable homes or offices. I mean, this was not really a regular thing very recently.
Yeah.
And what a blessing to be able to do this together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the world has changed and is changing. I mean, I'm happy I started doing virtual work back in 2015. But we are in a different way of working and living, and much more flexible paths than ever. So
we have choices. When I went to the jungle, I took an iPad, and I got served ex parte notice, which means we haven't, from the other side, we have an emergency, we have to go to court, and I was able to say, no, we don't. This is an emergency. We'll do but I, prior to being as in the electronic sort of multiverse that we're in now, like I could have never left. That would not have been an option for me to just leave and kind of go off the grid. So it's really given us so many opportunities to do things from any corner of the planet, and opened up our horizons in ways that weren't available to us not that long ago.
Yeah. No, it's true. Well, I wanted to say, I know we are 3 single women in our 60s here who have all been our own bosses or our own bosses. And I also think of some of my friends who I'm very envious of, who have been married for 40 years, 30 something years, 40 years. And I can see the tremendous commitment and their family life and all of that. I mean, just to say, I know we're talking about how wonderful it is to be single and to have made it to the other side. And I think, both sides, you can make a wonderful life either way. So I don't want to let anybody think that we're pro-divorce, so to speak.
Oh, no, I'm pro-happiness. I turn many people away who come in and I don't think they're ready, and I'll make them go to counseling. And that's what I did, because certainly when children are involved, the collateral impact is far reaching. However, I'm certainly not envious of anybody who's married. I don't think envy is a particularly useful emotion. But I do think there are many different ways to be. And I think that you can have a marvelous family life, whether you're married or not.
Yeah.
You just need to reconceptualize family. So while my ex-husband and I didn't speak for many years, unless we were in a courtroom dealing with our divorce, we now are able to communicate and co-parent our young adult children as needed, be together, enjoy each other's company. We're good friends. And in terms of commitment, I think that if you're aging in reverse, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have that experience. I've had a number of relationships, long-term and short-term, with men since I was married that are deeply satisfying. So there's just a whole lot of different ways to be. And I was raised in a very religious family, and got married very young at the age of 22, had my first child at 24, thought I was going to be married forever. I enjoyed married life when it worked. And now I really enjoy single life, and also hold out the hope that I'll, find a life partner. And if I don't, that's fine too. So, I think it's important to recognize there's all kinds of different ways to be, and that we accept all those different ways of being, and no single way is better than another. But, we have options available to us that if we were born in a different generation, we probably wouldn't be doing this right now, talking about the way we've chosen to live our lives in the way that we are. And I think it's very important to affirm that it's great. It's great there are many ways to have a great life as a single woman in your 60s.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of things as a single woman in your 60s without a husband.
Yeah.
Like these yoga retreats. The first one I went to, I was supposed to go with my girlfriend, and she was in a terrible car accident and couldn't go with me. I went all by myself. The only person I knew last year was the leader of the retreat, and it was small because it was still during COVID. So I think there were 7 of us, but 4 of those women I count now as my best friends and I've traveled with. So I think we just need to be open-minded about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So great. And to hear your perspective and your energy, and very inspiring.
Very inspiring.
Yes. I feel the same way about the two of you. It's been really fun to watch you, Daisy, and your progression as we've worked together, and you've worked with my clients and helped them so greatly. And I often think of you as a role model in that regard. And Kimberly, to get to know you better and learn about you and the work that you've done is, I think that when we come together, we really can support each other and experience a lot of joy through this work that we're doing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we're all about developing the community.
It's important. It's really important that people, the women I know that are scared to, I don't like to use this term, but I can't think of a better one right now on the spot. But, if they're in bad marriages, they know their spouse is like dating another person openly in town, and they're afraid to sort of pull the trigger on moving out of their marriage. They're just terrified.
It sounds so cute.
To the extent we can imbue them with this knowledge so that they too can make informed decisions, I think is really, really important and impactful.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
So we're going to have your contact information and our show notes, and the information about your fantastic book. So I have my copy. Not that I need that at this point in my been there, done that. But we're so glad to have been able to have you here, Anne.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thanks for listening to the 60 Plus Best Life podcast. We hope you've learned useful and inspiring information today. We welcome your comments and also your suggestions of topics we need to discuss. If you know of someone you'd like to hear on our podcast, please share. We think of this podcast as a way to grow a robust community of people who are making life better at 60 plus. People who are living their best life. Thanks again for listening to, subscribing, and sharing the 60 Plus Best Life podcast.